Target locked. Engaging now. The words were barely spoken before the blast hit. The Varazoth ambassador had barely finished speaking before the strike detonated, sending shockwaves through the sleek walls of the Varazoth's diplomatic ship. Arcos Jalen's heart stopped as the lights flashed, the sound of destruction overwhelming his senses. He didn't have time to react, no time to defend himself. The blast struck him square in the chest, knocking him off his feet. His last thought was that he was right. This wasn't just about peace. It never was. Back on Earth, the silence was deafening. The news came like a punch to the gut. Arcos Jalen, Earth's youngest diplomat, had been killed during peace talks with the Vrazoth. The broadcast cut in, the screen flashing the grim message across the globe. Admiral Ryan Everin froze in front of the screen, his face drained of color. His eyes narrowed as the footage played, showing Arcos's lifeless body on the floor. The news anchor's voice crackled in the background, but Everin couldn't hear a word. His mind was already on the move, calculating, strategizing, but a wave of fury overwhelmed him. "This can't be," Everin whispered. "Not like this." "Sir?" Sergeant Drom Vosek stepped forward. His tone was sharp, but Everin didn't respond immediately. Vosek stood at ease, his face hard as stone, his jaw clenched. "What are we doing, Admiral?" "They've killed one of us. What's our next move?" Everin's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on his chest, but his voice was cold, controlled. "We do not act out of rage, not yet. We need to think this through." Vosek didn't back down. "Think about what? Arcos is dead. We need to make them pay." Everin turned slowly, meeting Vosek's fiery gaze. "I know, but we're not going to react blindly. The Vrazoth want us to lash out. They want to see us weak. We can't let them see that. Not yet." Vosek's fists tightened, his teeth grinding. He had been close to Arcos. The loss felt personal, too personal. He wanted nothing more than to turn every Vrazoth into ash. He took a step forward, voice low but filled with intensity. "They killed him. They think we're weak. If we don't show them we're capable of retribution, Earth will never be taken seriously again." Everin nodded. He understood the feeling. Arcos was more than a diplomat to him. The young man had been like a son, someone he had mentored, someone with the potential to reshape the future of humanity. But vengeance wasn't a path to victory. It was a path to destruction. Everin wasn't willing to let grief cloud his judgment. "We'll act, Drom, but we'll do it the right way," Everin said, his voice hardening. "We'll make them regret this, but we will not become them." Vosek's anger didn't fade, but he nodded, albeit reluctantly. He could feel the burning desire for vengeance inside, but he understood. Everin was right. Acting in anger would only cost them. The strategy room buzzed with activity as the high-ranking military officials convened. Drek Zovan, a seasoned intelligence officer, brought up a display of the Vrazoth's command structure. Their weaknesses had been hidden for years behind their technological superiority, but Zovan had discovered cracks in the foundation. The Vrazoth's communication systems were outdated. The centralized nature of their control left them vulnerable. "Here," Zovan pointed, "we've identified the core of their communications. If we target these nodes, their entire command structure will collapse. They won't be able to respond to a coordinated attack." Everin studied the map, his mind turning. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't going to be a war of brute force. It would be a calculated, precise strike. But even as the plan began to take shape, a bitter thought lingered in Everin's mind. Could they truly maintain their moral high ground and still carry out a mission of this magnitude? The room fell silent as the plan started to unfold. Strike teams were assigned, cyber warfare protocols were established, and the clock began ticking. Within 48 hours, the plan would be in motion. The Vrazoth would learn that underestimating Earth was their final mistake. "We'll act swiftly," Everin said finally, breaking the silence. "We don't have the luxury of time, but we won't make the same mistake they did. We'll make them regret this." As the operation began to take shape, the Vrazoth's leadership was completely unaware of the looming storm. Their arrogance had blinded them to the truth. The humans they dismissed were far more capable than they realized. Arcos's death wasn't just a political loss, it was the spark for something much larger. In the darkened corners of Earth's military strategy rooms, a quiet resolve settled in. Humanity wasn't just going to survive, they were going to fight back. They would not let Arcos die in vain. His vision for Earth's future, his belief in humanity's place among the stars, would not be silenced. "Damn it," Admiral Ryan Everin muttered under his breath, his knuckles white against the smooth surface of the command table. The screens around him glowed with faint blue light, outlining detailed maps of the Vrazoth's network. His jaw tightened as the weight of Arcos Jalen's death bore down on him, but more than that, what it would mean for Earth's future. He could already feel the wheels of war beginning to turn, and yet he couldn't escape the internal storm brewing inside him. The air in the command center was thick, dense with tension. The room was dim, lit only by the heads-up displays showing the latest intelligence. Sergeant Drom Vosek stood at attention across the table, his expression fierce. He had been close to Arcos, maybe closer than anyone else. The loss was personal for him, and the anger was evident in the way his fists clenched at his sides. "What's the holdup, sir?" Vosek's voice was clipped, an edge of urgency in every syllable. "We know what we have to do. They've killed one of ours. We should go in, now. We hit them hard. Show them the cost of their arrogance." Ivran took a slow breath, his gaze unwavering. "We'll strike, Drom, but not in blind rage. We need to think this through." The sergeant's jaw clenched. "Think?" His tone was tight with frustration. "What more do we need to think about? Arcos is dead, and the Vrazoth are laughing at us. What's there to calculate?" "Everything," Ivran replied, his voice firm. "This isn't just about revenge. It's about ensuring Earth's survival. If we rush in recklessly, we risk everything." Vosek didn't reply immediately. His frustration was clear, but he understood the weight behind Ivran's words. He had fought alongside the Admiral long enough to know that Ivran's decisions were always calculated, always precise. But this time, something was different. The loss of Arcos burned inside him, and the thought of doing nothing, of allowing the Vrazoth to go unpunished, gnawed at his resolve. Behind them, Drex Zovan, the quiet intelligence officer, stepped forward. His voice cut through the tension, calm but assertive. "We've uncovered some key weaknesses in the Vrazoth's communication infrastructure. If we exploit these vulnerabilities, we can disrupt their entire chain of command. Their leadership relies on outdated systems that leave them exposed." Ivran turned, his mind quickly shifting gears. Zovan's analysis was solid. The Vrazoth, with all their technological superiority, were flawed in the most critical way, and Earth had found the way in. But the timing still didn't sit right with him. "This isn't a simple hit and run, Zovan," Ivran said, his voice tight. "We're talking about dismantling their entire command structure. This kind of operation takes more than just strategy. It takes precision, and we can't afford to lose control now." Zovan met Ivran's gaze. "I know. That's why we need to act quickly before they adapt to the shift. We strike fast, hit them where it hurts, and dismantle them from the inside out. With Arcos's death, we have the moral high ground. We use that, turn it into an advantage." Vosek finally spoke, his voice low but driven. "If we don't hit them now, they'll think we're weak. Arcos's death will be for nothing." Ivran's eyes hardened, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He was right. Arcos's death couldn't be in vain. Humanity couldn't afford to be seen as weak in the eyes of the galaxy. But the cost, how far were they willing to go? How much of their own soul would they sacrifice? Vosek's voice broke through his thoughts, insistent. "If we wait, it'll be worse. We have to make them regret this." Ivran's gaze locked on the map in front of him. The Vrazoth's command centers were spread out, heavily defended but far from untouchable. But how much collateral damage would they be willing to accept? His mind flicked to Arcos, the young diplomat who had believed in peace, who had believed that humanity could carve out a place in the galaxy without resorting to violence. The very thing Arcos had stood for was slipping through his fingers now. He had been a beacon of hope, and now he was gone. The sharp edge of grief ran through him again, but Ivran buried it. Now wasn't the time for mourning. Now was the time to act. "I'll take responsibility for this," Ivran finally said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "We will strike, but we do it on our terms. No reckless actions. We break their systems first. Then we take their leadership down. Vosek's eyes flared with intensity. That's all I need to hear, sir. Zovan nodded, already pulling up more data on the screen. We'll need to deploy special forces to infiltrate their communication hubs. I'll have the teams ready for a full strike within hours. Ivrin exhaled, his chest tight. The pieces were falling into place, but his decision wasn't without cost. The loss of Arcos was just the beginning. What came next would determine whether humanity would live to see another day in the galactic arena. The team moved quickly, each man falling into the rhythm of their roles. The next few hours were a blur of final preparations and last-minute adjustments. Zovan coordinated the technical aspects, making sure their cyber attack would be as lethal as possible. Vosek organized the strike teams, readying them for a tactical assault on key Vrazoth targets. Ivrin's role was to hold it all together, ensuring that no one acted out of vengeance, but with cold, calculated resolve. As the operation moved forward, Ivrin could feel the weight of it all pressing on his shoulders. The Vrazoth had made their choice. Now Earth would make theirs. He stood in front of the map, his finger hovering over the holographic control display. Every second counted. If they hesitated, if they faltered, the galaxy would see Earth as a fragile player, ripe for exploitation, and that was a fate he could never allow. "Ready, Admiral," came the voice from the comms. Zovan's words echoed through his mind. They were ready. Ivrin's hand slammed down onto the control. "Begin! We've got something." Zovan was hunched over his console, his fingers moving rapidly across the controls. His eyes flicked back and forth across the screen, darting from one line of code to another. The laser plasma display before him flickered as the data compiled, revealing an unexpected vulnerability within the Vrazoth's communication network. Ivrin, standing behind him, had his arms crossed. The weight of the decision from earlier still lingered heavily, but his mind was sharp, focused. "What are we looking at, Zovan?" Zovan's voice was calm but filled with anticipation. "The Vrazoth are running a centralized communication system. It's outdated, inefficient, and most importantly, it's vulnerable." His hands moved faster now, almost like they had a mind of their own. "There's an entry point here, an unprotected node in their satellite network. If we breach it, we'll have access to everything." Vosek, standing across the room, didn't wait for the full explanation. "Then why are we still standing here?" His voice was raw, still burning with the anger from Marcos's death. "This is what we needed. We strike now. Take out their infrastructure. Let them feel what we've been feeling." Ivrin held up his hand. "We need to understand what we're dealing with first, Drom. Zovan, how deep does this go?" Zovan paused, adjusting a few parameters on the screen. The information was now laid out before them. Detailed, calculated. "It's deeper than I thought. This isn't just a vulnerable system. It's a blind spot in their entire chain of command. If we disable this node, it could take out their entire military coordination. This gives us an opening, one that could cripple their ability to respond." Ivrin's mind raced. This was it. The vulnerability they'd been searching for had presented itself, but something in the back of his mind tugged at him. The mission was becoming more complex by the minute. They weren't just fighting the Vrazoth anymore. They were maneuvering within a fractured empire. "That's the key then," Ivrin said, his voice firm but thoughtful. "We hit them where they're weakest, but we still need to know more. We can't just rely on this. We need intelligence from the inside." Vosek stepped forward, fists clenched. "So we're going to wait?" Before Ivrin could respond, a transmission alert pinged through the comm system. Zovan glanced up in surprise. "That's not a Terran frequency?" Ivrin's instincts kicked in. He moved to Zovan's side. "Put it through." The screen flickered and a face appeared. Lantor Vex, a Vrazoth intelligence officer. His sharp features were strained, eyes darting nervously. The display was encrypted, and the connection was barely stable. But one thing was clear. The look in Vex's eyes was not one of an enemy. It was a look of desperation. "Admiral Ivrin," Vex said, his voice low but filled with urgency. "You've been looking for a way to exploit our systems. I'm here to give you one." The room fell into stunned silence. Ivrin's eyes narrowed as he processed the unexpected turn. A Vrazoth was offering help? It didn't make sense. Vex, a member of the Vrazov's intelligence division, was a part of the Empire that had been systematically dismantling Earth's hopes for peace. Why was he reaching out now? What's your game, Vex? Ivrin's tone was sharp, cautious. You've been working against us for years. Why would you suddenly offer us help? Vex leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. The Vrazoth are not unified, Admiral. We've been at a tipping point for years. There are factions within our leadership that are ready for peace. People who are tired of the endless wars and dominance. But they can't act without risking their lives. I'm one of them. Ivrin's gaze hardened. You expect me to believe this? After everything your people have done? Vex's face twisted with frustration. You don't have to believe me, but you need to listen. If you don't take this opportunity, the Vrazoth will collapse in on themselves. I can help you exploit that. You can destroy our command structure from the inside. There was a long pause. Ivrin's mind raced as he weighed the possibilities. Could they trust Vex? Was this a trap, or was this their way in? The room behind Ivrin was silent. Vosek, fists still clenched, could hardly contain his anger. He spoke before Ivrin could respond, his voice like fire. We take the help, Admiral. This is the chance we've been waiting for. If he's offering us this information, we move on it. The Vrazoth are fractured. Let's take them down while they're weak. Ivrin's eyes locked onto Vosek's, the tension thick. We won't act just because the opportunity presents itself. We need a plan. Vex interrupted. The window is closing. If you don't strike now, the internal divisions will solidify, and your chance will be gone. Ivrin's mind spun as he considered the implications. An internal division within the Vrazoth. The very idea seemed too far-fetched. But there was something in Vex's eyes, something real, that made him hesitate. Could they exploit this fracture? Could Earth really manipulate the Vrazoth's internal chaos to their advantage? Send me the data, Ivrin said finally, his voice low and controlled, and we'll consider it. But know this, Vex, you're playing a dangerous game. If you're lying, it'll cost you everything. Vex nodded, his face shadowed with uncertainty. I'm not lying, Admiral. This is your chance. Use it wisely. The screen went dark. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air as Ivrin turned back to his team. What's our next move? Vosek asked, his voice tense, impatient. Ivrin stepped away from the table, his hands clasped behind his back. The sense of urgency was undeniable. We proceed with caution. We have to verify everything Vex said. If he's telling the truth, we strike not just at their systems, we strike at the heart of their power. But if this is a trap, we'll be ready. Zovin brought up the data again, a series of encrypted files popping up on the screen. The Vrazoth's internal division goes deeper than I thought. We can leverage this, Admiral. The chaos within their leadership, we can push them to the brink. Ivrin's mind was already working, calculating, considering every angle. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but it was still too early to tell if the picture would be one of victory or destruction. I'm not gambling with Earth's future, Zovin, Ivrin said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet resolve. We act when we know we can win, not just when the odds are in our favor. Let's get to work. We move in 1 hour. The tension in the room was thick, like the weight of a storm that threatened to break. The countdown had begun. Everything was in place. The plan was set. Now it was a matter of executing it with precision, without hesitation, and without the luxury of second-guessing. The stakes were clear. Failure would leave Earth exposed, the death of Arcos Jalen forgotten, and the galaxy's perception of humanity as weak cemented forever. Admiral Ivrin stood over the large tactical display, his eyes scanning the detailed map of the Vrazoth's command structure. The screen, dimly lit by the glow of shifting figures, outlined key targets, their communication centers, high-ranking officials, and strategic locations in their capital. It was a blueprint for what would soon be a vicious, surgical strike. We deploy in 30 minutes, Ivrin said, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the room's palpable tension. The sharp tone of his voice left no room for doubt. This wasn't just a mission, it was a point of no return. Beside him, Drex Zovan continued refining the technical elements. His fingers tapped rapidly on the control panel as he inputted the last of the intel. The heads-up display in front of him flickered as the newly integrated data streams fed the operational plan. Zovan's expression was cool, but anyone looking closely would see the pressure behind his eyes. The Vrazov's weakness was exposed, and now it was time to exploit it. There were no margins for error. "We'll hit them where it hurts most," Zovan stated, his voice quiet but intense. "Their communications are a mess. We breach the central hub here," he indicated the target area, "and we'll have the entire empire in disarray. We'll sever their control, and the rest of their defenses will fall." Sergeant Drom Vosek stood off to the side, impatient, his posture taut like a coiled spring. He was ready to strike back for Arcos, for everything that had been taken. "Cut the comms and take them down one by one," Vosek said, his voice low but filled with a hunger that no one in the room could miss. He had been waiting for this moment since the news broke. "We make them pay for Arcos. We break them, and we do it fast. They won't see us coming." Ivran turned to face him, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on his shoulders. "We do it fast, yes," he replied, his tone edged with caution, "but we do it with precision. We're not here to give them what they want, chaos. We're here to cripple their leadership. If we move recklessly, we risk losing everything." Vosek's jaw clenched, but he nodded begrudgingly. He wasn't going to argue, not now. The mission came first, but the fire in his eyes never faded. He had lost something irreplaceable, and now he would make sure the Vrazov understood what that cost. Lieutenant Jarek Talon, the weapons specialist, entered the room, his expression focused and his movements deliberate. He carried a data pad, his hand steady as he passed it to Ivran. "We're set with the ordnance," Talon said, his voice cool as ever. "Explosives, EMPs, and the breaching charges are ready. The timing's set. We can hit the target and disappear before they know what's happening." Ivran glanced at the data pad, scrolling through the tactical specs. It was the final piece of the puzzle. Everything they needed to dismantle the Vrazov's operation was at their disposal. But even with all the preparation, the question of morality still gnawed at him. "How much is too much?" Ivran muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "How far can we push this without losing ourselves in the process?" Zovan turned to him, meeting his eyes. "This is the only way, sir. We hit them where they least expect. The Vrazov are fractured. We exploit that fracture, use their own systems against them. They've been in power for centuries, but their foundation is weak." Vosek stepped forward, his boots clicking against the floor with purpose. "We need to do this. Arcos would have wanted us to act, not hesitate." Ivran inhaled deeply, his mind shifting between the tactical details and the weight of Arcos's death. He had trained the young diplomat, mentored him in the ways of diplomacy and covert strategy. But Arcos had believed in peace. Arcos had believed in a different way. And yet, Arcos's death was not just a loss. It was a call to action. "This is for Arcos," Ivran said, his voice low but filled with certainty. "This is for Earth. We'll do this right. No unnecessary risk. We'll break them, piece by piece." He turned to the group, meeting their eyes one by one. "Ready?" A chorus of affirmatives came back at him. Each member of the team had a role to play, and now it was time to execute. The room was quiet as the team began its final preparations. The atmosphere was thick with the urgency of what was to come. Ivran glanced around the command center, his eyes briefly resting on the Terran war chest. A set of meticulously prepared supplies, weapons, and tools that would carry them into the heart of enemy territory. The weight of the operation was in every detail, from the smallest components to the biggest decisions. He wasn't just leading a mission, he was leading humanity's stand against an empire that had underestimated them. Vosek, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife he had carried from the beginning of the war, stood by the door. His eyes were locked on the weapons. The blade had been a gift from Arcos, a reminder of the bond they shared, and now it would be the instrument of vengeance. The team was ready. As the final plan was set in motion, the tension inside the command center reached its peak. There was no turning back now. They had their moment. This would either be Earth's defining victory or its undoing. "We move out," Ivran said firmly, signaling to the team. "It's time to end this." "Initiating now." The command center erupted into activity, the quiet tension of planning giving way to swift, urgent movements. Admiral Ivran stood with his back straight, eyes fixed on the screen, his fingers brushing over the map one last time before the mission began. The Vrazoth were about to feel Earth's resolve. It was time to prove they had underestimated humanity, that the quiet diplomacy they mocked was only the calm before the storm. As the Terran teams prepared to strike, the room hummed with a charged energy. Sergeant Drom Vosik stood by the tactical panel, his gaze darting over the mission logs, ensuring every detail was in place. He was on edge, ready for the first real action in what had been a long, painful road to this point. "All systems go," Talon, the weapons expert, reported as he keyed in final commands. The heads-up display blinked green, signaling that the strike teams were ready. They had done everything right. The explosives, EMPs, and tactical gear were ready for deployment. "We're good to go, Admiral." Ivrin gave a brief nod. His mind was still heavy with the weight of the decision, but there was no turning back now. His voice was firm, cutting through the room. "Proceed with infiltration. We hit the communication hubs first, then take out the key officials. No room for mistakes. Understood?" The strike teams responded with a unified, controlled affirmation. Ivrin's heart pounded, but he kept his demeanor steady. This was what they'd trained for. On the ground, Vosek led his team through the darkened streets of the Vrazoth capital, a ghost moving through shadows. The city was eerily quiet, the once imposing architecture of the Vrazoth towering above them, casting long, jagged shadows on the ground. The quiet was deceiving. Beneath the surface, the Empire was starting to fracture, and tonight, they would be reminded of just how fragile their dominance really was. Vosek's mind was focused. His team moved in sync, silently as predators, their movements swift and calculated. The first target, a Vrazoth command center, heavily guarded but not as secure as the Vrazoth thought. They approached the entrance and Vosek's hand hovered over his weapon. "We breach in 5, he whispered, his voice barely audible through the comms. The breach was clean. The explosive charge tore through the heavy security doors with a deafening crack, but the team was already moving, disappearing into the command center before the alarms had even gone off. Inside, the Vrazoth were caught off guard. The disruption was immediate. Vosik and his team took down the guards quickly, making their way through the corridors, planting explosives at key systems. The chaos started to ripple outward, and the control center's lights flickered as the first wave of sabotage took effect. Back in the command center, Zovan monitored the situation on his display, his fingers working the keys with rapid precision. The Terran cyber attack had begun. They had managed to bypass the Vrazoth's outdated communication system, flooding it with false signals. The more Vrazoth officials tried to respond, the more disoriented they became. The failure to communicate with each other created a disarray that spread like wildfire through their ranks. The heads-up displays in front of Ivran blinked with real-time updates. He watched as the Vrazoth scrambled, their command structure beginning to unravel. They were disoriented, unable to organize, unable to react. The attack was working. Their communications were disrupted, and there was no coordination among the Vrazoth forces. "It's happening," Zovan murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Ivrin's jaw tightened. The first phase was going smoothly, but he knew better than to celebrate too soon. The Vrazoth would adapt, they always did. But for now, Earth had the upper hand. The system was in chaos and the Terran forces were moving swiftly. On the ground, the strike teams were beginning to feel the weight of their success. The Vrazoth leadership was in disarray. As the team planted the final explosives in the command center's control room, Vosek allowed himself a moment's satisfaction. But the mission wasn't over yet. "We've done our part," he said into the comms, his voice steady but filled with the satisfaction of the strike. "The Vrazoth won't recover from this." But Ivrin's voice crackled through the comms, steady as always. "Stay sharp. The first wave had been executed with ruthless efficiency, but it was only a small part of the larger plan. The true test would come when they took out the high-ranking Vrazoth officials, their leadership. Disrupting their communications was only the beginning, but the Terran forces had already proven their strength. What they lacked in sheer numbers, they made up for in strategy and precision. The shattered communication hubs and the first wave of chaos symbolized not only the breakdown of the Vrazoth's control, but also the shift in power. The Vrazoth might have once believed themselves invulnerable, but humanity had just shown them otherwise. "We've hit them hard." Evren's voice was steady, but beneath it, the pressure was mounting. The first phase had gone smoothly. The Vrazoth's communication network was shattered, their command centers thrown into chaos, and their ability to respond had been crippled. But the real test had only just begun. The Terran forces had hit the Vrazoth where it hurt most, their leadership. The moment had arrived for the Vrazoth to realize the true extent of their vulnerability. Evron's team had fractured their empire, but it was now time to watch it unravel in real time. In the heart of the Vrazoth capital, chaos was beginning to spread. Lantor Vex, the once loyal Vrazoth intelligence officer, had provided the final piece of the puzzle. His betrayal was more than just a simple leak. It was a revelation. The internal divisions he had exposed within the Vrazoth leadership were already showing their effects. Evren had known the Vrazoth were arrogant, but he hadn't anticipated the depths of their disarray. Vosik's team had completed their strike on the Vrazoth command center. They had eliminated several high-ranking officials, and in their place, a power vacuum began to form. The Vrazoth, despite their ruthless reputation, were now scrambling. With their communication lines cut and their leadership in disarray, the Empire was starting to fracture from within. Evren watched as the situation escalated. The heads-up display in front of him flickered with real-time updates, the Vrazoth scrambling to maintain control. The power struggle within their ranks was becoming more evident with each passing second. Some of their leaders were beginning to argue openly, while others turned on each other. The once proud empire was on the verge of collapse. "They're not reacting," Zovan muttered, his eyes glued to the screen. His voice was tinged with surprise. "The Vrazoth command system is in chaos. The internal communication failure is spreading like wildfire." "They're lost," Vosik's voice crackled over the comms. He was already deep inside the capital, leading a secondary strike team to eliminate more key figures. "I've never seen anything like it. They're killing each other." Evron's hand tightened around the edge of the table. The initial success had been satisfying, but the realization was settling in now. They had cracked open the Vrazoth's empire, and what they were seeing was a society beginning to tear itself apart. This wasn't just a military victory, it was a psychological one. The Vrazoth had relied on their unity for centuries, and now it was collapsing piece by piece. Lantor Vex had proven himself invaluable, but his role was far from over. He continued to feed critical information to Evren's team, tipping the balance in humanity's favor. Vex's intel had revealed the factions within the Vrazoth that were desperate for peace. But those factions had been too afraid to act. Now those factions were being exposed, and Earth was exploiting that division. The psychological warfare was in full swing. The disarray within the Vrazoth's ranks was spreading rapidly. The Terran forces had pushed them into a corner, and the pressure was beginning to show. Leaders who once felt untouchable were now making desperate, chaotic decisions. Those who had once believed in their empire's invincibility were now questioning their own positions, unsure of who to trust. Evron stood in front of the laser plasma display, his eyes scanning the growing chaos. "We've done more than break their systems," he said, his voice low. "We've made them question everything they thought they knew." Zovan glanced at the display, his voice steady. "The panic is escalating. The Vrazoth are fracturing right before our eyes. They're too divided to fight back effectively." On the ground, Vosik and his team moved with deadly precision. Their strike had been successful, but as the Vrazoth fell into disarray, the team was forced to adapt. They encountered pockets of resistance, but the Vrazoth were not fighting with the same unity they had before. The enemy forces had fractured, and some even fled the command centers, unsure of who to follow. It was a battle that had already been won before the first shot was fired. Vosik's hands tightened on his weapon. He had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, the thrill of victory felt hollow. The Vrazoth were collapsing, and yet the cost of their actions weighed heavily on him. As the day wore on, the Vrazoth's collapse deepened. High-ranking officials were executed by their own people, and the empire they had built over centuries crumbled before the Terran forces. It was a moment of triumph, but it came with a bitter aftertaste. Evren knew this wasn't just a military victory, it was a moral gamble. The Terran forces had exploited the Vrazoth's weaknesses with cold efficiency, but at what cost? What would be left in the aftermath? They had fought for Arcos, but the deeper they went into this conflict, the more they began to question the true price of their actions. The shattered Vrazoth palace stood as a grim symbol of their downfall. We finish this now. Admiral Everon's words hit the team like a hammer. The last phase was here, the culmination of everything they had fought for, everything Arcos had stood for. The Vrazoth were on the brink of collapse, their once mighty empire shattered. The final strike was within their grasp, but it wasn't just a physical blow, it was a psychological one, a move to cement humanity's position as a galactic power. Everon stood before the command display, his fingers tracing the final stages of the operation. The Terran forces had already crippled the Vrazoth's communication and military coordination. Their command centers had fallen, and their leadership was fractured. The Terrans had played their hand perfectly, but the next move would be the one to deliver the death blow. "We're set," Zovan said, his voice steady as he inputted the final commands into the system. His hands worked like clockwork, calibrating the systems to ensure that the Vrazoth could never recover. The digital maps of the Vrazoth capital flickered on the heads-up display, now showing only the remnants of their former power. The signs of their final collapse were everywhere. "Targeting Vrazoth leadership," Zovan muttered, eyes narrowing as the plans came to fruition. The algorithms were set, and the cyber attack was prepared. "We'll isolate their top officials. They won't be able to regroup." Vosek's fingers were already wrapping around the grip of his weapon, his mind on the task ahead. He had led the charge on the ground, striking at the heart of the Vrazoth. Their elite had already been decimated, but the remaining officials had been elusive. Today that would change. He turned to Everon, his eyes sharp. "We finished what we started, sir. They won't escape this time." Everon met his gaze, but his mind was elsewhere. The weight of the decision still pressed on him. What they had done, what they were about to do, would change everything. The cost of this war, the moral questions that had haunted him since Arcos's death, loomed larger with each passing second. But he had a duty, to Earth, to humanity. There was no turning back. "We're not here for justice anymore," Everon said quietly. "We're here to ensure Earth survives." The Terran forces had already infiltrated key Vrazoth locations, planting explosives and disabling critical infrastructure. But this last strike was going to be different. It wasn't just about taking out their defenses. It was about forcing the Vrazoth to submit, to realize that their reign was over. There would be no negotiation, no compromise. On the ground, Vosek and his team moved swiftly through the corridors of the Vrazoth palace, their weapons ready, their eyes scanning for any signs of the remaining leadership. The mission was simple: find and eliminate. The walls around them seemed to close in with every step they took. The palace, once an imposing symbol of power, now stood in ruins, a shadow of its former self. The faint glow of the heads-up display illuminated the path ahead, showing the locations of their targets. They had no time to waste. As they reached the final command center, Vosek signaled to his team, "Take them out, fast and clean. No room for mistakes." The team moved in, breaching the door with lethal efficiency. Inside, a few high-ranking Vrazoth officials scrambled to respond, but it was too late. The strike teams were already upon them, taking them down one by one. The command center, once the heart of the Vrazoth's military might, was now just another casualty in the war. Back at the command center, Zovan's display blinked with an incoming transmission. It was Vex, the Vrazoth traitor who had exposed their internal divisions. His betrayal had been the key to understanding how fractured their empire had become. "I've sent you the location of the last surviving officials." Vex's voice crackled through the communication. "They're holed up in the eastern wing, but they're running out of options." Evran didn't need to be told twice. The operation was almost complete. With the remaining Vrazoth leaders isolated and their forces in disarray, the final move was clear. "We end it here," Evran said firmly, making the decision with finality. "Send the strike teams in. This ends now." The last phase of the operation unfolded with terrifying speed. Vosek's team moved in to eliminate the remaining Vrazoth leaders, while Zovan's cyber attack disabled their final defenses. The Vrazoth palace trembled as the walls shook with the force of explosions. There was no place for the Vrazoth to hide. They had lost. The Terrans had dismantled their empire from within, leaving nothing but ruins in their wake. "We've done it!" Vosek said, his voice hoarse over the comms. He wiped blood from his brow as he surveyed the wreckage of the Vrazov's final stronghold. Their leadership was gone. The strike teams had cleared the palace. The Vrazov had nothing left to fight with. Ivrin stood in front of the display, watching the Vrazov flag fall from their central tower. The Terran flag was already rising, a symbol of their victory. The once mighty empire had been toppled, and Earth had emerged victorious. But as Ivrin looked at the flag, he couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that had crept into his heart. The victory was undeniable, but it felt hollow. The cost of vengeance had been steep. The galaxy had seen humanity's strength, but at what price? The screen in front of him blinked once, twice before the final message came through. The Vrazov had submitted. "We've broken them." Admiral Ivrin's voice was heavy, almost hollow. The victory was undeniable. The Vrazov were defeated, their empire shattered beyond repair. The battle had been won, but in the quiet aftermath, the weight of the cost hung heavily in the air. The Terran flag now flew above the Vrazov capital, a symbol of both triumph and the steep price paid for it. But the victory, while significant, felt different in the wake of Arcos's death. It had been his vision, his belief in humanity's place in the galaxy, that had driven this operation forward. Yet now Ivrin couldn't escape the emptiness that gnawed at him. His gaze lingered on the map, the once proud Vrazov territories now reduced to a series of fractured lines and broken cities. But his mind was elsewhere, on Arcos, his young protege, the one who had believed in peace, in diplomacy, in a future where humanity didn't need to fight to prove its worth. Arcos had seen the potential in humanity to stand tall in the galaxy, and now his vision had come to fruition. But at what cost? Sergeant Drom Vosek stood next to him, his fists still clenched, but his expression was harder, more resigned. He had been the first to push for action, to take the fight to the Vrazov with unrelenting fury. Now, as the last remnants of the Vrazov government lay in ruins, Vosek was left to grapple with the personal toll. "I thought it would feel different," Vosek said, his voice low, almost lost in the silence of the command center. Ivrin turned to face him. "What did you expect, Drom? A moment of glory?" The sergeant's eyes burned with a mix of grief and anger. "I expected justice. Arcos didn't die for this, for us to stand here in the aftermath." Ivrin's gaze softened, but the burden of leadership was unmistakable in his eyes. Justice was done, but victory always comes with a price. We couldn't save Arcos, and we couldn't save ourselves from becoming what we fought against. Vosek shifted his weight, his frustration palpable. Then what was it all for? Ivrin sighed. It was for survival, for humanity's place in this galaxy. If we had done nothing, the Vrazov would have wiped us out. But now we've shown the galaxy that humanity isn't just a footnote in this war. But at what cost? Vosek's voice cracked slightly, betraying the depth of his internal conflict. Outside the command center, the Terran flag flapped in the cold wind, a symbol of the power humanity had seized. But it was hard to ignore the darker meaning behind it. The flag didn't just represent victory, it represented the harsh truth that sometimes, to survive, you had to make impossible choices. It wasn't a triumph that felt sweet or righteous. It was a victory born from blood and fire. The shattered Vrazov palace lay in ruins, a symbol of their once untouchable strength, now crumbling into the dust. The palace was no longer a symbol of dominance. It was a tombstone for the empire that had once ruled over the galaxy, and Ivrin could feel the weight of its fall in his bones. They had succeeded. The Vrazov had submitted, their leadership decimated, their will to fight broken. But the satisfaction of that success was tempered by the reality of what it had cost. Arcos was dead, and nothing, no victory, no power, could ever bring him back. Ivrin and Vosek were alone in the command center now, standing side by side, gazing at the ruins of the Vrazov empire that they had helped bring down. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words. They had done what needed to be done, but the echoes of the choices they had made would resonate long after the mission was complete. "You think the galaxy will remember us for this?" Vosek asked, his tone distant. Ivrin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared out at the horizon, where the shattered Vrazov capital lay in ruin. The galaxy will remember that we fought, that we survived, but it will remember the cost more than the victory. Vosik's eyes flicked to the flag once more. And Arcos? Ivran's lips tightened. He will be remembered too, as the one who believed in peace, the one who made us believe in something bigger than ourselves. Vosik turned toward him, his voice quiet but firm. But he's gone, and we're left with this. Ivran nodded slowly. We're left with this. The final transmission came through. The Vrazoth had agreed to humanity's terms. The victory was official, and Earth's dominance in the galaxy was cemented. But as Ivran read the message, the realization of what they had truly accomplished settled in. They had defeated the Vrazoth, but in doing so, they had crossed a line they could never uncross. As the final words of the transmission blinked across the display, Ivran turned to Vosek. We did what we had to do, Drom, but we must never forget what it cost us. Arcos would have wanted peace. We can honor him by ensuring that his vision isn't lost. We are humanity's future, and the decisions we make today will shape the galaxy for generations to come. Vosek nodded, but his gaze remained distant, focused on the flag that flew high above the capital. I don't know if we'll ever find peace, but we've earned a place here. Ivran's voice softened. We've earned a place, yes, but we've also made a choice, and that choice will follow us wherever we go.